In the original starter deck, the original format of Yu-Gi-Oh!, players use monsters, spells, and traps to beat their opponent down to 0 life points, and this is how it was for a very, very long time. Even if you go up to like 2014, 2015, you see combo decks for the most part still using trap cards. I know a lot of people think of decks like Windups and Inzectors as being very aggressive decks of 2012, and certainly those decks were very aggressive, but they still use like a bunch of trap cards actually. If you look at like old windup lists, oftentimes they would play 8 to 10 trap cards. Even though we conventionally think of the deck as just a combo deck that does this big hand loop, it still played a bunch of trap cards to fall back on. However, if you look at modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, even the control decks aren't really playing that many traps. Like if you look at Sky Strikers and Salamangreats, sure, they might play Infinite Impermanence, and in the case of Salamangreats, they might play 1 Rage and 1 Roar. Overall, those decks, which are considered to be the control decks of the modern era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, aren't playing that many traps. However, trap cards aren't completely gone from the meta. We still see decks like Guru Control and True Dracos and other decks like Frogs and Altergeist still taking some top cut spots at regionals and YCSs and WCQs. In today's video, because I'm a huge fan of trap cards, I know a ton of you guys watching this video are probably playing decks like the ones that I just mentioned. I want to talk about some of the challenges, but also some of the benefits to playing trap cards in 2019. Well, one of the big benefits to me personally is that I've noticed that over the past couple years, Konami has given us some pretty ridiculously strong traps that, while they aren't good enough for a meta strategy to use, a non-trap strategy to use, they are very at home in trap decks because you're already playing a bunch of traps, and now you can play so many more powerful ones than you would have been able to like 5-10 years ago. For example, we can now play triple Solemn Judgment and triple Solemn Strike and Crackdown and Lost Wind and all these really good trap cards that, while the meta decks probably don't care enough to actually put those in their strategies because they're not very good going second, and some other reasons that we'll talk about. One of the things that I love about playing trap cards in a deck is that you don't really have to combo to set up your negations. You just have to set a Solemn Strike. When you look at like one of the combo decks, the things that they have to do to set up negations, they usually have to summon multiple monsters. They have to summon multiple cards from the extra deck, and while that is more consistent in theory when you're going first, just setting a trap card sometimes is a lot easier and a lot less susceptible to things like hand traps. One of the cool things about a deck like Altergeist, for example, is that most hand traps don't really affect you because you're just setting your negations instead of doing a big combo. But I don't want to pretend like trap cards are perfect, because they certainly aren't, and there are some issues that you have to take into account whenever you're playing a deck based around trap cards. So for example, the first big issue is that trap cards, while powerful negation tools, they're not actually good enough to just win a game on their own, because you actually need monster cards to close out duels. This is very different from something like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, which when that card negates something, you also are left with a huge monster on your side of the field. The second big downside of playing trap cards is that they're not very good going second. This has always been an issue if you look back at like Trap Hole and Trenchal Tribute. While those cards are pretty decent at stopping your opponent from building a board in the first place, if your opponent already has monsters on field, especially a lot of them, they don't really do anything. That's a huge issue in 2019. I personally, when I build decks that are based off of trap cards in this format, I want to use trap cards that are good both going first and second. If you look at my Altergeist list, you'll see cards like Crackdown and Lost Wind and Solemn Strike and Altergeist Protocol. These are all cards that you can draw going first, and they're going to be very powerful, but even going second, you can use them to help break boards. This is very, very important when building a deck based around trap cards in 2019, because you're not going to win every single die roll. You need to have some sort of backup strategy for when you go second and don't draw hand traps. So you want to try to play trap cards that are good not only going first, but also going second, because that's one of the biggest downsides of conventional trap cards. The third big downside is really, really big right now, and that's that there are tons of ways, like so many ways, to get trap cards off the field without using effects to break them. For example, cards like Twin Twisters, Evenly Match, Red Reboot, all these cards, if your opponent draws them, or especially draw multiples, just mean that you instantly lose a lot of those games. Now, don't get me wrong, there are counters to those cards. Things like Solemn Judgment and Wiretap and Dark Bribe, even in some cases, and even Artifact Latency to stop Evenly Match are all pretty decent options in general, but you won't always draw those cards at the perfect moments. What I'm trying to say here is that if you're playing a trap deck, no matter how good it is, no matter how many counters you have to those cards, you just have to accept that every once in a while you're going to lose 1 or 2 or maybe even more games just to those cards for you not having an out. This is just going to happen, and it happens when you play combo decks as well, just in a different way. Cards like Nibiru that just came out are really good against combo decks and can break the entire board with one monster effect, Raw Sphere Mode, Kaijus, Regeki, and Dark Hole in the past, no matter what deck you're playing, there are always going to be cards that instantly break your entire board if you don't have the proper negations. So while it definitely sucks that trap cards have to deal with so many cards, especially cards like Red Reboot where you just can't do anything against them, in general you just have to accept no matter what deck you're playing, you're going to have to deal with cards like that. So you need to have the proper counters, or just accept that you don't always have the perfect out and you're just going to lose some of those games. Of course, one of the things that you as a competitive player should be doing is that you should look in the format and see if people are even playing those cards that I just mentioned, because for example at the UDS almost no one was playing Red Reboot, almost no one was playing Evenly Match, and that meant that I could come in there with Altergeist and not have to face too many crazy back row destruction effects. Certainly I had to play against Denko Sekka and Dino Wrestler Prankatops, and things like Twin Twisters were very popular, even Cosmic Cyclone was very popular, but those cards for the most part are manageable because while they do kill 1 or 2 cards on your field, in a lot of situations you actually can still win those games. It's really cards like Evenly Match and Red Reboot, which currently are rising in popularity since the release of the Megaton, because a lot of people are moving away from combo decks. When those cards are very popular in the metagame, maybe it's not the best time to actually be playing a trap-based strategy, because the best formats for trap-based decks are the ones where people aren't siding a million counters to your strategy. So think back like 6 months ago or 9 months ago when Altergeist was like one of the best decks of the format, pretty much right before the Salem Great Structure deck was released. Pretty much everyone had Red Reboot and Evenly Match in their side deck, and that was okay for Altergeist players because a lot of times they could play through those cards, they drew the right outs to them. But for players playing things like Frogs or any other slower trap-based strategy that wasn't as good as Altergeist in that format, you were going to have a rough time, because even though people weren't putting those cards in their side decks for whatever strategy you were playing, your deck still lost to them, so now you had to play a bunch of people that automatically just had side deck cards that were really good against your deck, even if it happened sort of accidentally. But it's not all doom and gloom, because don't get me wrong, trap cards have a lot of things going against them, but they also have a lot of things going for them. You don't actually have to do a big combo to get to your negation, so if your opponent has a few hand traps, you'll probably still be able to set cards like Solemn Judgment or Solemn Strike or Compulsory Evacuation Device or something along those lines. So even if your opponent has interruptions, you'll still be able to set a few of your own. That's really good for long-term tournaments, because it means you won't just lose to your opponent drawing like the Ogre for your Guard Dragon LP or the Lancia against your Orcus combo. You'll always have some way to negate your opponent's cards, and that's really, really solid. But perhaps the biggest benefit of playing trap cards in 2019 especially is that your opponent just won't know what they are, because obviously they're face down, but a lot of times you can play some trap card tech options and your opponent might know what the most likely trap cards that you have face down are, but they won't know specifically which ones they actually are because they're face down, and that's a pretty big deal. Because think about it, when you're going against a Thunder Dragon deck and they full combo you and they have the Hot Red, they have the Colossus, maybe even they have Zombie Stein and Heretic Seal, even though it's a lot to push through, you know exactly what cards they have to negate your own cards. However, when you're playing against a trap strategy and your opponent has 4 or 5 cards face down, you don't actually know which cards those are. They could all be terrible, they also could all be amazing, and they could be somewhere in between. This is very, very crucial because it means as a trap-based player, when you're playing against your opponent's like combos, you need to save the hidden trap card information for as long as humanly possible. What I mean by that is that, for example, if you had something like Altergeist Protocol set that you set off of the Marionetter, if you also had cards like Solemn Strike and Lost Wind face down, your opponent knows you have the protocol, so that should be the first one that you use, because what a combo player is trying to do when they're playing against you playing a trap deck is they're trying to sort of erase any unknown cards, because once they narrow it down to just a few cards like protocol that they already know you have, now they know what to play around, and that sort of isn't the benefit that you're trying to get by playing trap cards. So in a case where you have something like Lost Wind and Solemn Strike and protocol that your opponent knows you have, you want to do the protocol first and then save the other cards for as long as possible without revealing them to your opponent. Of course, in the case of something like Lost Wind, yes, it comes back so then your opponent knows you have it, and in the case of protocol, it's going to be face up on the field, so your opponent will get to play around that in the later turns, but we're really focusing on the first turn here, because especially for a deck like Altergeist, you get to a point when even though you have so many negations that are known, things like Silks, things like protocol, things like Hexia, once you set up that board, your opponent probably shouldn't have that many cards because you use trap cards to sort of break down their initial plays. With careful practice and metagame analysis of which trap deck is actually the best one to play, or even if you should play a trap deck in a particular format, you actually can see a lot of success. I mean, it has happened time and time again where we get to a very stagnant combo format and someone comes out here with a very crazy trap-based strategy, a control-based deck, and no one knows how to do anything against it because they took out all of the back row destruction from their side decks. This is what you have to do as a trap-based player. You can't just build a trap deck and hope for the best. You have to look at what people are playing. Are people playing Evenly Match and Red Reboot? Because maybe you should play Dark Bribe or Wiretap to counter those cards. But if they're not playing those cards, maybe you just don't care. You don't play any counters to them because most players won't have them in their side decks. It's very important to look at what decks are recently topping and look at which cards they're playing that would be good against back row cards so that you successfully know how to build your own strategy. Anyway though, hopefully this was helpful to anyone that's aspiring to play a deck like Altergeist or Guru Control or True Dracos or what have you. I really do like trap cards a lot, as you guys have seen time and time again when I posted deck profiles of more controlling strategies. I don't know what it is about them. I think I really do like their existence face down, so they're completely unknown. It's kind of funny watching your opponent freak out when they don't actually know which cards you have that can negate their combos. I'll see you later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.